Hi everyone, this is Sandy with Sandy's and Stitches, and this is the first video in a series of tutorials on knit and crochet, or just all things yarn. The first thing we want to look at is the difference between the two techniques and the difference between the tools that you'd be using depending on which one you decide to start with, or if you're switching between the two. The first thing I want to look at is a crochet project, and this is created using this hook. This crochet project, you'll notice that you'll see the individual rows of stitches, and you'll see that each one of these is one stitch. And this is worked in the round. You can work back and forth, and these are created one at a time using this one hook. But if you were going to look at a knitting project, you'll see that it's harder to pick out each individual stitch, and obviously there's a whole lot more of them, so crochet does work up a bit faster than knitting does. This, you'll see the V's here in your knit, and that's how you can tell that this is knitting, that you'll see each individual V for the knit, or on the back side you'll see these little bumps. You know, they almost go in rows like this because you're working each individual stitch on two needles. They'll go in one direction and then they'll go in the other direction. Work it on one needle and then work it on the next needle. And these are capped on the end, so you go back and forth with these. These are worked back and forth, back and forth. And then the other differences between knit and crochet are just a few things that you can do with them. Like this one, these ribs are created a different way than you would do in crochet, even though you can do the same thing, but they're created differently. You'll see here's our bumps. Here's our V's, our bumps and our V's, and you'll see that when you stretch it out, you see all those ribs. Now, some of the differences between the tools that you'll be using: each crochet hook is all you'll need to make each stitch. This is specifically an H hook. They all come in different sizes, and that depends on the weight of yarn you'll use, and we'll be talking about that. For instance, if you look at a skein or skein, it's technically skein, but for some reason I can't make myself say that, so I always end up saying skein. You'll look at this skein or ball of yarn, and you'll see that this is a size 4, or a weighted 4, which is also called worsted weight or medium weight. And on the yarn, you'll see exactly what tool you need for it. If you are using hooks, if you're knitting, it'll tell you what size. This one calls for a 5.5 millimeter hook. I'm sorry, 5.5 millimeter needles. And then if you look, it's calling for a 6 millimeter crochet hook. So this one would be a bit small for what they're calling for. But when you check your gauge, you'll figure out if you need to use exactly what it's calling for, or if maybe you need to go up or down in your hook size or needle size. And if you look, we'll show you several different types of hooks. This one happens to be made of plastic. This is a size 7. This one's a little bit bigger if you look at the shaft, because that's what we'd be measuring to figure out what our hook size is. We also have different types of hooks like this. This is a Tunisian crochet hook. If you will look, it's quite long. And Tunisian crochet is also called knit crochet because it's kind of a hybrid of the two, where instead of doing each stitch and finishing them off by themselves, you would work in one direction, half the stitch, and the other half the stitch is worked in the other direction. You close them off. Now, looking at needles, you'll find that they come in different varieties as well. For instance, these were the capped ones I just showed you, and we also have ones that are double points, which they'll have points on either side as opposed to having caps, and these are used for working in the round. And you'd be using maybe socks or hats or things like that. But another tool to work in the round is this pretty cool guy here, which is a circular needle, or circular needles, because you have your two needles, and then there's your wire, and you go all around, and this just holds the place of your stitches while you're working here on the ends. And they come in different lengths. These specific ones are actually my favorites these days because you can only have one set of needles, but you notice these are two different lengths of wires. You may need them for different projects, different size hats, and then you can interchange the two so that you don't have to have quite so many. And of course, everything comes also in different materials. These that I just showed you, these are made out of birch. And birch is a very smooth surface, but not quite as smooth as these aluminum ones that we just showed you. And then they'll come in also plastic, like this one here. These are bamboo. And of course, in crochet hooks, you'll have the same thing. And you notice that they're all different sizes. These are small for those smaller weights, maybe a worsted weight. These are large for something chunkier, something possibly like this. This is a bulky weight. This is a size 5 yarn. And you'll look on here, and here's where you'd find your needles. These call for a 9mm. This is written really small. It's very small, hard to see. But you'd find your 9mm, which coincidentally, that's what this was, 9mm. And then of course you look, and these call for an 8mm hook, or a size L. And in US terms, you'll see they're labeled A, B, C, D, E, and they go all the way up really, really large, depending on your project. Or it's a size 11, and that's not millimeters, that's a size number, and that's a US size number. In different countries, they might be different. But they'd always be 8mm for a hook, possibly for this one, or 9mm. You'd have to look and see where you are and what you would need to use. Now, this is a chunky yarn. Yarns also come really extremely fine, like this lace weight mohair that I sometimes use, but you would use a really, really small hook, maybe something like this. It's really hard to see the hook right here. This is a size 7. It's extremely small. And then of course there's yarns that, these are specialty yarns. This specific yarn is a ribbon, but when you pull it out, it looks like a mesh. And you would crochet on the non-finished end over here, or you would work your project on this side even if you were knitting. And here is something made of that. This is a scarf that's been made. This is specifically crochet, and you'd have to kind of dig around in there to find the stitches all the way down in here. But you could use knit or crochet with something like that. You would just have to choose what works best for you. And then there's plenty more tools and plenty more tricks of the trade that we're going to be talking about throughout our series of videos. And I hope you continue watching and enjoyed this little introduction between the differences of knit and crochet.